Hello there. Today, in this softly spoken audio talk, I'd like to introduce you to the sounds curious A to Z of cocktails. This is going to be an occasional series where I lead you on a light-hearted exploration of a selection of cocktails, each one starting with a letter of the alphabet. Together, we'll discover a range of fun and interesting drinks, as well as some of the fascinating history and people behind them. As usual, there'll be a selection of images for you to look at on the accompanying video, but there's no need for you to keep your eyes open if you don't want to. If you prefer, you can just settle back, relax, and let my voice guide you. So, welcome to the A to Z of cocktails. Let's begin at the beginning with the letter A and look at 4 different recipes, 3 that are alcoholic and 1 which is a non-alcoholic mocktail. We'll start with a vintage classic, the American Beauty. This drink was first recorded in 1913 in Jacques Straub's Manual of Mixed Drinks, and it's still listed in most classic cocktail books today, although it's rarely seen on contemporary bar menus. However, I think the American Beauty is worth discovering, or rediscovering, because, as well as having an interesting flavour, this cocktail is also a visually stunning drink. It has a 2-tone, deep crimson colour that looks both glamorous and sophisticated, and is the sort of cocktail that you could imagine sipping in the 1920s, within the heady world of an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. The vibrant colour of this cocktail is the inspiration behind its title, because it's named after an intensely coloured rose, also called the American Beauty. This was first cultivated under a different name in France in 1875, but it was introduced into the United States in 1886 by the English nurseryman George Field, who had previously worked as a White House gardener under President Ulysses Grant. George Field was responsible for giving the rose its new American name, and since then, its beautiful colour, velvety petals and fragrant scent have made it something of an icon. It was adopted as the Washington, D.C. state flower in 1925. It was immortalized in a Frank Sinatra song in 1950, and it inspired a memorable movie scene in the 1999 film American Beauty, in which the actor Mina Savari is filmed lying in a sea of crimson rose petals. Given all these fascinating cultural associations, I think it's time the American Beauty cocktail had a revival. But if you're planning to try one for yourself, be warned. This is a cocktail with a kick. It contains a potent blend of brandy, vermouth, creme de menthe and port. So it's definitely one to be sipped slowly rather than slurped quickly. The original 1913 recipe is as follows: 1 bar spoonful of creme de menthe, a goblet filled with fine ice, the juice of half an orange, half a bar spoonful of sugar, half a jigger of brandy, half a jigger of French vermouth. Shake these ingredients together, then strain into the goblet, dress with fruit and mint, then top off with a bar spoonful of port wine. Like many vintage cocktails, the recipe for the American Beauty has been adapted and tweaked over the decades. These days, it's more likely to feature grenadine rather than sugar, as grenadine is a sugar syrup that creates the same sweetening effect, but has a deep pinkish red hue that adds even more to the intensity of the cocktail's colour. It's also important, colour-wise, to ensure that you use white creme de menthe for this cocktail, rather than the more commonly found green-coloured version. Otherwise, you'll end up with a mud-coloured drink. On the subject of crème de menthe, I would advise using caution when you add this ingredient to your American beauty. Cocktails work best when they balance together unique or even opposing flavour combinations in order to create a mix that is complex and delicious. However, to make it work, the balance does have to be just right. And because the American beauty also contains orange juice, too much crème de menthe can end up leaving you with a flavour that's similar to the taste you get if you accidentally drink a glass of breakfast juice straight after cleaning your teeth. For a more contemporary version of the American beauty, I would recommend the recipe by the New York-based chef Marcus Samuelsson, who very wisely takes down the ratio of crème de menthe to create a beautifully balanced and elegant drink, worthy of its iconic name. The ingredients are ice cubes, 1 ounce of brandy, half an ounce of dry vermouth, 1/4 teaspoon of white crème de menthe, 1 ounce of orange juice, 1 teaspoon of grenadine, half an ounce of tawny port. Fill a shaker halfway up with ice cubes. Add all the ingredients except the port, shake vigorously, and strain into a martini glass. Carefully top with a layer of tawny port, making sure it drifts along the top of the drink. This last step of Samuelsson's recipe is particularly crucial if you want to create that classic crimson two-tone effect in your glass. The best way to achieve it is by holding an upside-down bar spoon very close to the surface of the cocktail, then carefully drizzling the port over the back of the spoon so that it lies on the drink's surface. The only other embellishment I would personally add, in tribute to both Straub's original recipe and to the drink's floral associations, is a single rose petal garnish. For our second letter A cocktail, we move from America to Italy, and from a vintage recipe to a contemporary favourite. The Aperol Spritz seems to have been everywhere for the past few years, and it's become a staple on bar menus around the world. However, its origins lie in early 19th century Venice, when the city was under the command of the Austrian Empire. The occupying forces who came to the city weren't used to the strength of the local Veneto wines, and so they began to order them diluted with a spray of water, the word Spritz coming from the German word for spray. With the invention of the soda siphon in 1829, soda water, or sparkling water, gradually took over from still, and by the end of the 19th century, the Spritz Veneziano had been born, a mixture of soda water, prosecco, and a dash of any bitter herbal or fruit liqueur. Aperol is one such bitter liqueur. Its exact recipe remains a closely guarded secret, but it's known to be a blend of rhubarb, gentian flowers, and cinchona, which is the same plant that also produces quinine. In 1919, the Barbieri Liqueur Company released Aperol for the first time, and in the years following World War I, it became a popular liqueur choice for the Spritz Veneziano, blended in the classic combination that's still used today: 3 parts Prosecco, 2 parts Aperol, and 1 part soda water. Over time, a Spritz Veneziano that was specifically made with Aperol became known simply as an Aperol Spritz, and by the 1950s, it was a fashionable drink among wealthy European socialites. However, in the past decade or so, the Aperol Spritz has become a far more democratic drink, and in its home city of Venice, you can pick up an Aperol Spritz and a plate of accompanying delicious cicchetti snacks for a very reasonable price. However, this cocktail has now transcended its original Venetian origins, and it's popular all over the world, for its refreshing balance of sweet and bitter flavours. To make an Aperol Spritz, drop a few ice cubes into a large wineglass and add 3 shots of Prosecco. Follow this up with 2 shots of Aperol, then stir slowly and finish with 1 shot of soda water. As this cocktail is a lovely orange colour, it looks great garnished with a slice of fresh orange or a contrasting sprig of green mint, and it's the perfect drink for sipping on a lazy summer afternoon. From wealthy socialites to avant-garde artists. For our third A cocktail, we'll journey from Italy to France and discover the Absinthe Drip, a drink that will forever be associated with the bohemian world of fin-de-siecle Paris. Absinthe is a distilled spirit known for its aniseed flavour, its brilliant green colour, and its exceedingly strong alcoholic content. It's also infamous for its nickname, La Fée Verte, or the Green Fairy, which is a reference to its supposedly magically intoxicating qualities that can cause the drinker to have hallucinations and visions. The precise origins of absinthe are lost in time, but its main herbal ingredient, wormwood, has been used as a medicine for thousands of years. It's the wormwood that gives absinthe both its brilliant green colour and its name, the Latin term for it being Artemisia absinthium. The first absinthe distillery was opened in Switzerland in 1797, and its popularity grew steadily throughout the 19th century, especially in France, where it was made fashionable by the poet Baudelaire. In his seminal work, Les Fleurs du Mal, Baudelaire refers to absinthe as a green caress that's more poisonous and potent than either wine or opium. Through the drink, the poet sees my soul in reverse, where my dreams come in throngs. This evocative description added to absinthe's intriguing reputation as a psychoactive substance capable of bringing on visions. However, in reality, there's nothing actually in absinthe that can cause hallucinations. While it's true that Artemisia can be toxic if taken in large quantities, repeated tests have shown that the spirit is in fact free from any psychoactive effects. And given how highly alcoholic it is, it's more likely that any absinthe visions stemmed from drunkenness rather than wormwood. Nevertheless, a mystique began to develop around the drink that escalated further when it became the liquor of choice for bohemian writers such as Rimbaud and Verlaine. The painter Edouard Manet launched his artistic career with a picture entitled The Absinthe Drinker, and it became so fashionable in Paris that 5 o'clock in the afternoon started to become known as l'heure verte, or the green hour. The next generation of bohemians, including the painter Toulouse-Lautrec and the playwright and poet Oscar Wilde, also eulogized about the power of the Green Fairy and sealed absinthe's reputation as the most decadent and desirable drink in fin-de-siecle Paris. By the opening of the 20th century, however, a growing temperance movement was beginning to demonize absinthe, and in 1905, its notoriety tipped into horror when a Swiss farm labourer called Lanfray was convicted of killing his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. Lanfray had drunk 2 shots of absinthe first thing on the morning of the murders, but in fact he'd then continued to drink other types of alcohol steadily through the day, knocking back litres of wine as well as brandy before attacking his family in the evening. However, it was the absinthe that caught the public's imagination. Lanfray's crime became known as the Absinthe Murders, and in the following 10 years, public and political pressure led to the drink being banned across most of Western Europe, as well as in America. So terrible was the reputation of absinthe during the 20th century that, in spite of the evidence of scientific trials that proved it was no more toxic than any other alcohol of the same strength, the ban remained in place for many decades. It wasn't lifted in the European Union until 1988, and it remained in place in America until 2007. However, these days, absinthe is once again freely available, so cocktail connoisseurs can enjoy it in the same way that those decadent artists of Paris once did, by sipping on an absinthe drip. To make this cocktail, you mix a sugar cube with 1 part of absinthe and 3 to 5 parts of iced water, depending on how strong you want your drink to be. Begin by adding 1 shot of absinthe to your glass. Then hold the sugar cube over the top of the glass and allow the water to drip slowly over the top of it until it dissolves. To make this task a little less tricky, it's best to use a drip spoon, a wide, flat spoon perforated with holes, which was invented specifically for the purpose of making an absinthe drip. Place the drip spoon across the top of your glass and use it as a bridge to hold the sugar cube in place. This leaves both of your hands free to control the drip of water, which should be as slow as possible. Alternatively, you can buy a special water dripper or fountain, which is like a miniature urn with a tiny tap, and this drips the water down onto the sugar cube drop by drop. In both cases, as the water and sugar slowly drip down into the glass, the vivid green absinthe begins to cloud, and by the time the sugar cube is completely dissolved, you end up with a cocktail that's a milky colour, tinged with the faintest hint of pale green. Personally, I think the slow and rather ritualistic way of making the absinthe drip is part of what gave the drink its mystique in the first place. A lot of people love the idea of this cocktail without actually liking the flavour, because the taste of absinthe is quite bitter, and it has a licorice tang that people tend to love or hate. Nevertheless, if you're at all interested in the decadent artistic scene that existed in Paris at the end of the 19th century, then it's worth trying an absinthe drip at least once, just to see if you like it. Or, perhaps, to see what all the fuss was about. Our final A cocktail is in complete contrast to the absinthe drip, because while absinthe typically has an alcohol level of 60 to 70%, our next recipe has no alcohol in it at all. It's another vintage blend from the 1913 Straub Manual of Mixed Drinks, and it's called Arctic Punch. It requires 1 jigger of raspberry syrup, the juice of 2 limes, 2 pints of ginger ale, 1 pint of cold English tea, all of which you mix together and dress with mint and fruit. Now, I must say, I was rather intrigued when I found this recipe, because I'd never heard of it before, and when I tried to do a little bit of research on it, the only cocktail I could find bearing the same name involved rum, hot water, and pineapple juice, which would be a very different drink. I'm not sure where Straub's recipe came from. Jacques Straub himself was Swiss, the son of a distillery owner, and after emigrating to America, he became a wine steward at the Pendennis Club in Kentucky, and then later the wine and spirits manager at the historic Blackstone Hotel in Chicago. It seems that Arctic Punch might have been one of his own original recipes, and as it seems to have faded without trace from modern cocktail manuals, I thought it would be nice to try it out, just to see how it tasted. It turns out that Arctic Punch is rather a delightful drink, like a more grown-up alternative to lemonade, with subtle but delicious notes of raspberry, ginger, and lime. It's a lovely way to enjoy a cocktail even if you don't want to drink any alcohol. However, personally, I found the original recipe was a bit too sweet, the ginger ale overpowered the black tea, to the point where I couldn't taste it at all. And so, in an attempt to create a slightly more balanced recipe, I experimented with the ratio of tea to see if I could reduce the sweetness, while still retaining the lovely combination of other flavours. I managed to do it by making up the cocktail with 2 pints of ginger ale and 2 pints of tea. In other words, using equal amounts of both. And I left all the other ingredient amounts exactly as they were. This combination created a lovely balance of sweet and bitter flavours that I really enjoyed. And stirring in a handful of frozen raspberries also helped to add more depth to the subtle fruit notes in the drink. The result is beautifully refreshing, and I suspect I'll be making quite a few pitchers of Arctic punch as the weather gets warmer. If you're looking for a delicious and different mocktail to try out this summer, I would certainly recommend exploring this vintage 1913 recipe. That brings us to the end of our cocktail exploration through the letter A. I hope you've enjoyed it, and that you'll perhaps be inspired to try out a couple of the recipes for yourself. In a few weeks' time, we'll check out the letter B and explore some more delicious recipes and some more interesting cocktail history. Meanwhile, please remember to subscribe to the Sounds Curious channel if you want to keep up with my latest videos. And I'll see you soon for another ASMR adventure. Until then, thank you for your company. Goodbye.